The microphone squealed for a second before the sound settled. The room was glowing, gold chandeliers above, white roses lining the aisle, and the low hum of wedding chatter. I was standing at the far end of the hall, holding my gift in both hands, when I heard it. "She's such a beautiful bride," the master of ceremonies said. "And now, let's hear a few words from the bride's family. Would you like to introduce your father to our guests?" There was a short pause. Then my daughter, my only child, leaned into the microphone, her voice calm but loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "He's not my father." The words sliced through the air. Some guests gasped. Others turned their heads to see me. The man standing quietly in the corner, the man she had just erased with one sentence. I could feel every stare burning into my back. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. And I didn't leave. Because the truth was, they had no idea what was coming. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're listening from in the comments. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Daniel. I'm 58 years old, and for most of my life, I thought being a father meant giving everything you have without expecting anything in return. I raised my daughter alone after her mother left. I worked 2 jobs to pay for her school. I sold the house my own father built just so she could attend the university she dreamed of. And for years, I believed she understood the sacrifices I made. I was wrong. The shift began slowly, phone calls that grew shorter, visits that became rare. Then she met him, the man she would marry. His family was wealthy, polished, the kind of people who wore tailored suits even on a Sunday afternoon. From the moment I shook their hands, I knew I didn't fit the picture she wanted. I was the wrong background in her perfect photograph. Phil. I never thought she would erase me entirely. Not until the wedding day, when those 4 words, "He's not my father," made it clear. But what she didn't know was that I had come prepared. Prepared for this moment. Prepared for the truth to find its way into the light. And that truth would make sure no one in that room would ever look at her, or her new family, the same way again. It didn't happen overnight. If it had, maybe it would have been easier to understand. But when you love someone more than you love yourself, you don't notice the distance until it's already a canyon. When Emma was little, she'd run to the door the moment I came home. She'd hold up her school drawings, pull me into the kitchen to taste the cookies she'd helped bake, chatter about her day until her eyelids grew heavy. Back then, I was her world. The changes began when she left for university. Phone calls came less often. Texts were short, polite, and usually ended with "I'm busy." When she visited during the holidays, she seemed restless, like she was always waiting for something better to happen somewhere else. Then she met Andrew, the man who would become her husband. I'll admit, he was polite when we first met. He shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd been told exactly how to greet people in expensive circles. But there was something in his eyes, not disrespect, but calculation. Like he was measuring me, weighing me, and finding me lacking. It wasn't long before I met his parents. They were the kind of wealthy that didn't need to speak about money. It dripped from the way they dressed, the art on their walls, the casual mentions of vacations in Monaco. I noticed the small things first. They would speak to Emma about refining her image. They'd correct her when she mentioned growing up in our old neighborhood. They never used the word father when referring to me. I was always Daniel. Emma began dressing differently, talking differently, even laughing differently. And somewhere along the way, she decided I didn't fit into her new life. The real fracture came 6 months before the wedding. I had asked her about the guest list, just making conversation. She hesitated before saying, "Dad, it's going to be a certain kind of event. I don't want anyone to feel out of place." It stung, but I stayed quiet. If she was happy, that was enough for me, or so I told myself. But the more I saw of her future in-laws, the clearer it became. They wanted me invisible. And eventually, Emma wanted the same. So I started thinking, if they wanted me invisible, then I would let them think I was. But at the wedding, in front of every single person who mattered to them, I would remind them exactly who I was. Not by shouting, not by making a scene, but by showing the truth they'd worked so hard to bury. I began collecting pieces, old photographs, videos, letters Emma had written to me over the years. Moments they couldn't erase, no matter how much they wished they could. And I had the perfect place, and the perfect time, to let them all see. The wedding was 3 months away when the exclusions became obvious. At first, I thought it was just an oversight, a missed email, a forgotten phone call. But soon, the pattern was too deliberate to ignore. The engagement party? I learned about it from a mutual friend's social media post. The cake tasting? They told me it was just for the bridal party. The seating chart? When I asked, Emma hesitated before saying, "We're still finalizing it." She never sent it. And when the invitations went out, mine didn't arrive in the mail like everyone else's. It was handed to me in person, as if to remind me that my presence was an afterthought. Still, I didn't say a word. Silence, I've learned, can be far more unsettling than protest. I kept myself busy. At work, I stayed late, but not because of the job, because I was editing. Hours spent scanning photographs of Emma's childhood, digitizing old VHS tapes, pulling out the little moments that told our story. Emma riding her bike without training wheels for the first time. Her high school graduation, where she hugged me before anyone else. The 17th birthday video, where she said, on camera, "You're the best dad in the world." I knew if I simply told people what I had done for her, it would sound like bitterness. But if I showed them, if they saw the joy in her own words, the love in her own eyes, it would be undeniable. 2 weeks before the wedding, I visited the reception hall under the guise of helping set up. I spoke to the sound technician, a young guy named Mark. I told him I had a surprise video for the bride and groom, but I wanted it kept secret. He smiled, handed me his business card, and said, "Don't worry. Just give me the USB on the big day." From that moment, I carried the USB in my jacket pocket everywhere I went. It wasn't just a storage device, it was a reminder. A reminder that I wouldn't be erased quietly. The night before the wedding, I stood in my living room, staring at my suit laid out neatly on the couch. It had been years since I'd worn it. I ran my hand over the fabric, imagining the look on their faces when the truth played on that big screen. I didn't want revenge for myself. I wanted them to remember that no amount of money, no polished image, could rewrite the past we had lived. And in less than 24 hours, they would. The morning of the wedding was bright and cold. The kind of crisp air that feels almost clean, though inside me there was nothing but a storm. I arrived early. Not because I was eager to be there, but because I wanted to see everything. To take in every detail of this day they had worked so hard to keep me out of. The hall was already bustling. Caterers carried trays, photographers tested their lights, and guests in tailored suits floated from table to table. I stood at the entrance for a moment, scanning the room, trying to find my daughter. When I did, she was surrounded by the groom's family, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. Not once did her eyes meet mine. "Daniel," a voice said from behind me. I turned to see Andrew's father, immaculate in a tuxedo, a glass of champagne already in his hand. "Glad you could make it," he added, the words polite, but the tone making it clear I was merely tolerated. They had seated me at a small table near the back, next to distant acquaintances I barely knew. The family tables, of course, were near the stage. I didn't complain. I simply sat, watching the clock, waiting. During the ceremony, I noticed the subtle choreography of exclusion. The photographer avoided me in group shots. The speeches mentioned Emma's family, in a way that conspicuously left me out. Even the wedding program listed me simply as guest. But I stayed quiet. Because the USB was still in my pocket. Because I knew the moment was coming. Dinner was served. Glasses clinked. Laughter swelled. The master of ceremonies took the microphone and announced it was time for the bride to speak. Emma walked to the front, her dress shimmering under the lights. She smiled at the guests, then at Andrew. "And before we begin," the MC said, "I'd like to acknowledge the parents of our beautiful bride. Emma, would you like to introduce your father to our guests?" There was a pause. It was only a second or two, but in that moment, my heart pounded so hard I could hear it. Then she leaned into the microphone, her voice calm, her smile unwavering. "He's not my father." The words were light enough to sound casual, but sharp enough to slice through me. The room seemed to freeze. I felt eyes turn toward me, a heat crawling up my neck. I didn't stand. I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. Because what Emma, and every person in that hall, didn't know, was that I had come prepared to answer her in a way she would never forget. The silence after her words was heavier than any noise could have been. I could feel the weight of every glance, some pitying, some curious, and a few with the faintest trace of satisfaction. Andrew's parents wore polite, frozen smiles, the kind people put on when they think they've just won something. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat, awkwardly shifting to the next item on the program. That was my cue. I rose slowly from my seat. Every eye followed me as I walked toward the stage, my shoes clicking against the polished floor. I didn't hurry. I wanted them to feel every second of it. When I reached the microphone, the MC moved aside, unsure of what I was about to do. I looked at Emma. Her smile faltered for just a moment, a tiny crack in her perfect composure. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight," I began, my voice steady, "but since my role in this family has been clarified, I think it's only fair that I offer a gift." I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the small black USB, and held it up. "This," I said, "is for my daughter, and for everyone who may not know the whole story." I turned to the sound technician, Mark, who was already watching me from the booth. He nodded, slid the USB into his console, and the lights dimmed. The first image filled the giant screen behind us. Emma, no more than 4 years old, sitting on my shoulders at the park, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. The room was quiet. Then came the clips. Me teaching her to ride a bike. Holding her hand as she walked into her first day of school. Hugging her at her high school graduation. Her 17th birthday, where she looked at the camera and said, "You're the best dad in the world." Gasps rippled through the room. I didn't look at the guests. I only watched Emma. Her smile was gone. Her eyes were glassy. The video ended with a photo, the last one we took together before she went to college, and a caption in white letters. "Love is not something you erase." The lights came back on. I stepped away from the microphone without another word, the silence in the room deafening. I had no need to explain myself. The truth had been shown, and once seen, it couldn't be unseen. As I walked back toward my seat, and then past it, toward the exit, I heard it. The first applause. It was hesitant at first, then it grew, until the sound filled the hall. Not everyone clapped, of course, but enough did. And I knew, in that moment, that I had taken back something they had tried to steal from me, my place in the story. I didn't stay for the rest of the reception. The moment the applause died down, I stepped outside into the cold night air. It felt cleaner out there, freer, as if I'd finally set down a weight I had been carrying for years. I drove home in silence. No music, no news, just the hum of the road. I didn't need noise. The look on their faces replayed in my mind over and over, and it was enough. The next morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. Missed calls. Text messages. Emails. It didn't take long to find out why. Someone had recorded the entire thing, from Emma's words, "He's not my father," to the final frame of the video. By morning, it was everywhere. Shared on social media. Discussed in comment threads. Picked up by local news outlets. The responses were overwhelming. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to tell me they were proud. Strangers sent messages thanking me for reminding them what a father's love looks like. And Andrew's family? The perfect image they'd tried to protect began to crack. Some of their business partners distanced themselves. Their name was no longer just whispered in admiration. Now it came with questions. Emma called me 3 days later. Her voice was unsteady. She said she hadn't meant to hurt me like that. I let her talk. When she finished, I told her the truth. "Emma, I didn't do this to humiliate you. I did it so you'd remember who stood beside you before anyone else ever did. We haven't fully reconciled. Maybe we never will. But I'm at peace with that. Because that night, I didn't just reclaim my place as her father. I reminded myself, and everyone in that room, that no amount of wealth or polish can erase the truth of love and sacrifice. Sometimes, the loudest revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself.